How does a man count 1,300 incoming rounds in a single day and still have hands steady enough to write the number down? Corporal James Archer worked the logistics desk at Khe Sanh Combat Base, and on February 5, 1968, he logged 1,307 incoming mortar, artillery, and rocket rounds striking the perimeter. That averages to nearly 1 impact per minute across a 22-hour bombardment window. The base covered less than half a square mile. Archer's log, portions of which survive in Marine Corps historical archives at Quantico, tracks each category separately. 582 82mm mortar rounds, 211 rockets, most of them 122mm Katyusha type. The rest split between recoilless rifle fire and shells from 130mm field guns positioned in the hills across the Laotian border, guns the Marines could hear but rarely see. Khe Sanh held roughly 6,000 Marines and South Vietnamese Rangers. The North Vietnamese Army committed 2 full divisions, the 304th and the 325th, plus additional regimental elements, totaling somewhere between 35,000 and 40,000 troops. The siege ran 77 days, from late January to early April 1968. By every conventional calculation, the base should have fallen. The NVA had numerical superiority approaching 7-1. They controlled the high ground on 3 sides. They cut Route 9, the only road in, within the first week. Resupply depended entirely on air delivery into a runway that took direct fire daily. The ammo dump exploded on January 21st, destroying 1,500 tons of munitions in a fireball visible from Dong Ha, 20 miles east. And yet, Khe Sanh held. The base didn't scrape by, and it didn't survive on luck. The NVA threw everything doctrine prescribed at that plateau: sappers, human wave assaults on the hill outposts, trench systems that crept within 50 meters of the wire, and came away with nothing but catastrophic losses. The after-action estimates vary wildly. MACV claimed 10,000 NVA killed. North Vietnamese sources, published decades later, acknowledge heavy casualties without giving figures. The classified COFRAM employment report from 3rd Marine Division uses the word annihilating to describe the effect of firepower on massed infantry formations in the wire. Their word. If you know someone who served at Khe Sanh, or someone who should understand what American firepower coordination looked like at its most devastating, hit subscribe and send them this video. Drop a comment if you've got a family connection to the siege. Like the video so more people find it. These numbers deserve an audience. The question that matters isn't whether Khe Sanh held. It did. The question is mechanical. What combination of technology, logistics, tactical coordination, and sheer industrial output made it physically impossible for 40,000 professional light infantry soldiers to overrun 6,000 defenders on an isolated hilltop in the worst weather conditions South Vietnam had to offer? The answer involves the most concentrated application of American airpower in the entire war, a sensor system borrowed from anti-submarine warfare, and an artillery coordination network that could put steel on a grid square within 3 minutes of a sensor activation. Day or night, zero visibility, monsoon rain, sheeting sideways across the Quang Tri Highlands. The NVA brought courage, numbers, experience, and excellent small unit tactics refined across 2 decades of continuous warfare. None of it mattered enough. William Westmoreland pinned a map of Dien Bien Phu to the wall of his Saigon office in January 1968 and stared at it for weeks. The French disaster of 1954 haunted him, not as abstract history, but as a blueprint for everything that could go wrong at Khe Sanh. Same country, same kind of terrain, and an almost identical tactical geometry. A garrison in a valley surrounded by enemy-held hills, dependent on air resupply, facing a numerically superior force commanded by the same general. Vo Nguyen Giap had destroyed the French at Dien Bien Phu. Giap now commanded the divisions closing around Khe Sanh. Westmoreland understood exactly what Giap intended. The problem, for Giap, was that Westmoreland understood it 14 years in advance. The French had lost Dien Bien Phu for specific, quantifiable reasons. Their air force couldn't deliver enough tonnage. They had 48 transport aircraft servicing 13,000 troops. Their fighter bombers numbered around 75, flying from bases in Hanoi and Haiphong, burning fuel on long transits that cut loiter time over the battlefield to minutes. Their artillery, 60 pieces total, sat on the valley floor, exposed, and the Vietnamese dug their guns into reverse slope positions the French couldn't reach. Colonel Charles Perrault, the French artillery commander, promised his batteries would silence any gun Giap placed on the hills. When they couldn't, Perrault pulled the pin on a grenade in his bunker. The French had courage. They had veteran paratroopers, Foreign Legion battalions, colonial infantry with years of jungle experience. What they lacked was industrial depth. They couldn't replace losses fast enough or deliver ammunition in sufficient volume. And the sortie rate needed to compensate for destroyed artillery was beyond anything their air force could generate. Dien Bien Phu fell because the math didn't work. Westmoreland ran different math. He had access to the entire American military-industrial apparatus, and he intended to use every cubic foot of it. The operation he built around Khe Sanh carried the designation Niagara, deliberately chosen to evoke the image of cascading firepower falling on the enemy in an unbreakable torrent. Niagara had two phases. Phase 1 was intelligence collection, sensor drops, aerial reconnaissance, signals intercepts, agent reports, all feeding a target list that grew daily as NVA units moved into position. Phase 2 was the firepower itself. Look at the numbers. The Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps combined to fly an average of 300 tactical sorties per day over Khe Sanh during the siege's peak. B-52 stratofortresses out of Guam, Okinawa, and U Tapao in Thailand flew arc-light missions around the clock, each aircraft carrying up to 60,000 pounds of ordnance, each cell of 3 bombers saturating a box roughly 1 mile by half a mile. During the 77 days, B-52s alone dropped over 59,000 tons of bombs within the Khe Sanh tactical area. That figure exceeded the total tonnage dropped by all Allied air forces in the Pacific Theater during 1942. All of it directed at one siege on a single plateau around a single base. Westmoreland told a reporter in late February that Khe Sanh would be his reply to Dien Bien Phu. That American firepower made the comparison absurd. Blunt, maybe arrogant, but the logistics backed him up. The Marine artillery at Khe Sanh numbered 46 tubes, comparable to Dien Bien Phu on paper. The difference sat at Camp Carroll and the Rockpile, fire support bases to the east, where Army 175mm guns with a range of 32,000 meters could reach targets around Khe Sanh that the base's own howitzers couldn't touch. The 175 fired a 147-pound projectile. At maximum range, that shell traveled for over a minute before impact. NVA gun crews dug into the hills heard nothing before the ground opened underneath them. Additional batteries at Dong Ha and Gio Linh extended the fire support umbrella further. Total artillery pieces supporting Khe Sanh from all positions exceeded 130. Pyrath had 60 and killed himself when they failed. Westmoreland's obsession with avoiding a second Dien Bien Phu produced something the NVA had never encountered and had no doctrinal answer for: a defensive position where the defender's firepower radius extended miles beyond the perimeter wire, operated continuously regardless of weather, and regenerated faster than the attacker could absorb losses. The Americans will not be able to stand the losses, Giap reportedly told his staff in December 1967. The remark, attributed through a captured NVA political officer's debriefing months later, tracks with everything Giap did next. His logic followed a clean line. Dien Bien Phu had worked because massed infantry, dug-in artillery, and severed supply lines produced a cumulative pressure no garrison could survive. The Americans held Khe Sanh with fewer troops than the French had garrisoned at Dien Bien Phu. The terrain favored the attacker even more, triple canopy jungle running right up to the hills surrounding the plateau, with the Laotian border offering sanctuary for logistics staging barely 6 kilometers west. Giap had better roads this time. a more mature supply network through the western DMZ corridor, and 2 full divisions already positioned within striking distance by mid-January. The 304th Division moved down from the DMZ. The 325th, a unit that traced its lineage to the Siege of Dien Bien Phu itself, pushed east from Laos through Route 926. Regimental elements from the 320th and 324th Divisions filled supporting roles along the flanks. The buildup took weeks and involved moving thousands of tons of ammunition, rice, and medical supplies through jungle trails under constant aerial surveillance. NVA logisticians used elephants, bicycles reinforced with bamboo frames, to carry 400-pound loads, and human porters moving at night along routes marked with phosphorescent fungus scraped onto tree trunks. That detail comes from a captured logistics manual translated by MACV Intelligence in March 1968. The manual specified the species of fungus. Competent, methodical work by soldiers who understood their business. So what did Giap get wrong? He benchmarked against French airpower. The entire French Far East Air Force in 1954 could generate roughly 200 sorties per day at surge capacity across all of Indochina. Giap's anti-aircraft doctrine, his dispersal techniques, his tunnel systems, all calibrated against that ceiling. The Americans flew 300 tactical sorties daily over Khe Sanh alone, and that number excluded B-52 strikes, which operated on a separate schedule, generating 45 cells per day during peak periods. Each cell delivered 180,000 pounds of high explosive. Giap had planned for rain. He got a flood. The NVA's trench approach toward the base's eastern perimeter, a direct copy of Vauban siege tactics used at Dien Bien Phu, advanced methodically through February. Engineers dug communication trenches, parallels, approach saps, all textbook. Against the French, these trenches had reached the wire before sufficient firepower could collapse them. At Khe Sanh, sensor activations along the trench lines triggered arc-light strikes that erased hundreds of meters of excavation in single passes. NVA engineers rebuilt, the bombs returned. The captured operations diary of an NVA sapper battalion, portions declassified in 1985, records the unit rebuilding the same 400-meter trench segment 7 times in 11 days. Casualties from each bombing remain unlisted in the diary. The columns sit blank. Giap committed professional, experienced divisions executing a proven operational concept against a force that had quietly become something no army on Earth could match in concentrated firepower delivery. The plan made sense against every enemy except the one actually sitting on that plateau. Westmoreland picked up the phone on January 22, 1968, and authorized Niagara Phase 2. The first arc-light cell arrived over Khe Sanh 6 hours later. 3 B-52s flying at 30,000 feet, invisible above the cloud layer, dropping 500-pound and 750-pound bombs in a pattern that walked across a suspected NVA assembly area northwest of Hill 881 South. The Marines on the perimeter felt the concussions roll through the ground like a subway passing underneath. The earth flexed. Coffee jumped out of canteen cups. Men who had never experienced a B-52 strike nearby described the sensation as wrongness. The ground moving in ways ground shouldn't move. A low-frequency vibration that climbed through boot soles into the chest cavity before the sound arrived. The sound came last, a continuous tearing roar like someone ripping a steel sheet the size of a football field. That first strike landed 3,000 meters from the wire. By mid-February, Westmoreland had pushed the minimum safe distance down to 1,000 meters. By late February, the Marines at Khe Sanh requested and received arc-light drops at 900 meters from friendly positions. The Air Force Doctrine Manual specified 3,000 as the floor. Westmoreland overrode it. The file from 7th Air Force Headquarters at Tan Son Nhut shows the request chain: 3rd Marine Division to 3rd MAF to MACV to 7th Air Force. Each endorsement carrying a risk acknowledgement, each one approved within hours. Bureaucracy moved fast when the alternative was a second Dien Bien Phu. The tempo built steadily through February. 45 B-52 cells per day became the standard rate during the siege's peak. Each cell comprising 3 aircraft, each aircraft carrying roughly 20,000 pounds of ordnance in the internal bay, plus additional stores on wing pylons. A single cell covered a target box approximately 1 mile long and half a mile wide, with overlapping blast patterns. 45 cells per day meant 45 of those boxes erased every 24 hours in a ring around the base. The 7th Air Force targeting cell at Tan Son Nhut ran 3 8-hour shifts processing sensor data, photo reconnaissance, and signals intelligence into coordinates that fed directly to the B-52 mission planning cycle on Guam. Turnaround from sensor activation to bombs on target averaged 11 hours for a pre-planned strike. Emergency diverts, pulling a cell already airborne off its assigned target and redirecting it to a new set of coordinates, cut that window to as little as 3 hours. The NVA had no equivalent capability in their entire military establishment. Nobody did. Tactical aircraft filled the gaps between arc-light missions. Marine A-6 intruders flew in weather that grounded everything else, using their Diane all-weather navigation and attack system to deliver bombs through solid cloud cover onto coordinates radioed up from the combat base. Navy A-4s and A-6s cycled off carriers in the Gulf of Tonkin. Air Force F-4. Phantoms out of Da Nang carried cluster munitions, COFRAM bomblets designed to shred personnel in the open, each canister splitting into hundreds of sub-munitions that detonated at waist height across an area the size of a city block. The 3rd Marine Division After Action Report catalogs COFRAM employment on 14 separate occasions against massed infantry formations approaching the wire. The report's language stays clinical until page 37, where the drafting officer notes that recovery patrols found NVA dead stacked in the trench parallels at densities suggesting the troops had been unable to retreat or advance when the bomblets arrived. Trapped in their own siege works, the combined daily tonnage during peak operations exceeded 1,800 tons of ordnance delivered within a 5-mile radius of the base. The number alone means little without scale. The entire German Luftwaffe dropped an average of 200 tons per day on London during the 1940 Blitz. Khe Sanh's defenders called in 9 times that weight on their own doorstep, daily, for weeks. The ground around the perimeter turned to powder. Craters overlapped until the jungle canopy ceased to exist in a band stretching 2 kilometers in every direction. Aerial photographs from late March show the plateau ringed by what looks like the surface of the moon. Red dust coated everything: teeth, rifle actions, the inside of eyelids. Marines at Khe Sanh breathed it, ate it, slept in it. The laterite soil, pulverized by weeks of bombardment into a talcum-fine powder, turned every surface the color of dried blood. When it rained, the dust became a clay slurry that sucked boots off feet. When the sun returned, the slurry baked into a crust that cracked and became dust again. Below that dust, men lived in holes. The bunkers along the perimeter sat 3 to 4 feet underground, roofed with runway matting, sandbags, and whatever timber the engineers could scrounge. A direct hit from an NVA 122mm rocket would punch straight through. Everyone knew this. The standard response involved not thinking about it too carefully and adding another layer of sandbags. Sea rations arrived by air when the weather cooperated, which meant irregularly. The canned meals came in cases of 12, each containing a random assortment of entrees, and Marines developed fierce preferences. Ham and lima beans, universally despised, known as ham and motherfuckers, piled up unwanted. Peanut butter tins became currency. A can of peanut butter traded for 4 packs of cigarettes by late February, 6 packs by March. One Marine from Bravo Company, 1st Battalion, 26th Marines, kept a ledger of trades in a pocket notebook that survived the siege because he mailed it home inside a folded Stars and Stripes newspaper. His widow donated the notebook to the Marine Corps History Division in 2003. The entries list 27 peanut butter transactions across 40 days, with prices rising steadily, a tiny inflation index for an economy operating entirely underground. Staff Sergeant James Holt of India Company, ran a weapons cleaning station in his bunker and charged 2 cigarettes per M16. Fair price, given that the red dust jammed gas tubes within hours of cleaning. Holt cleaned between 30 and 40 rifles a day during the siege's worst weeks, according to his platoon commander's report. The sappers came at night. NVA reconnaissance teams crawled through the wire after dark, probing for gaps, marking mines, cutting paths for assault units that might or might not follow. Trip flares popped along the perimeter in irregular sequences, 2 in an hour, then silence, then 5 in 10 minutes. Marines on watch fired at shadows, at sounds, at the scrape of wire cutters they could hear but not see. Morning patrols sometimes found blood trails leading back toward the tree line. Sometimes they found bodies tangled in concertina wire, bolt cutters still gripped in dead hands. The sappers kept coming. Every night, different men, same mission, crawling toward a perimeter ringed by the most concentrated firepower on Earth. They came in waves, Captain William Dabney recalled decades later, and the waves just melted. Dabney commanded India Company on Hill 881 South, the most exposed outpost in the Khe Sanh perimeter, sitting 4 kilometers northwest of the combat base, with fewer than 200 Marines holding a hilltop the size of a suburban grocery store parking lot. On February 5th, the NVA 304th Division launched a battalion-strength assault against his position at 5:30 a.m. The attack force, estimated at 300 to 400 soldiers, advanced uphill through ground already cratered by arc-light strikes, moving in disciplined lines behind a mortar barrage that walked ahead of them toward the Marine trench line. Dabney's Marines opened with M60 machine guns at 200 meters. The forward observer, 2nd Lieutenant Donald Shanley, called in 105mm fire from the combat base within 90 seconds. Marine A4. Skyhawks already orbiting on station rolled in with napalm along the eastern slope. The canisters tumbled end over end, splitting open on impact, and a wall of orange light climbed the hillside fast enough to catch men running. The heat reached the Marine positions. Men on the perimeter felt their eyebrows singe at 70 meters from the nearest impact. The napalm landed close enough that Dabney's after-action report uses the word reckless to describe the delivery, then immediately notes he had requested exactly that distance. The NVA assault formation crossed through the napalm strike zone. Survivors kept advancing. A second pair of Skyhawks dropped cluster bomblets across the same axis 30 seconds later. The attack lasted 45 minutes. NVA soldiers reached the wire in 2 places, breaching the first strand of concertina before concentrated small arms fire stopped them. One penetration group, 7 men, based on the bodies recovered, got within 15 meters of a Marine fighting hole before grenades killed 5 of them. The remaining 2 died on the wire trying to withdraw. By 6:15 a.m., the assault had collapsed. Dabney's Marines counted 64 NVA dead visible from the perimeter. Recovery patrols over the following 2 days found an additional 97 bodies on the slopes and in the tree line. Blood trails suggested dozens more dragged away. India Company lost 7 killed and 35 wounded. Look at those numbers. A reinforced NVA battalion, veteran troops from a division that traced its history to Dien Bien Phu, executed a textbook night-to-dawn assault against a hilltop position held by a single understrength company. They brought mortars, sappers, RPG teams, everything doctrine prescribed. They hit the wire within 20 minutes, and they lost at minimum 160 men against 7. The mathematics of that exchange rate made continued siege operations suicidal, and Gayap's staff had to have recognized it. The 304th Division attempted 2 more battalion-strength assaults on the hill positions through February and early March. Each produced similar results, disciplined NVA infantry advancing into overlapping fields of fire backed by air-delivered ordnance, arriving faster than any command structure could adapt to. The division's combat strength dropped by an estimated 40% during the siege, 40% against a hilltop garrison that never exceeded 400 men. On the plateau northwest of Hill 881 South, the NVA 325th C Division massed 2 regiments in approach trenches on the night of February 29th. They dug forward positions within 1,500 meters of the perimeter wire, staging for a coordinated dawn assault that would strike the hill outposts and the combat base simultaneously. Sensors buried along Route 9, the acoustic and seismic devices planted during Niagara Phase 1, registered movement signatures consistent with large formation activity starting around 8 p.m. The targeting cell at Tan Son Nhut processed the sensor data by 10. 3 B-52 cells diverted from pre-planned missions over the Ho Chi Minh Trail. They arrived over the staging area at 1:14 a.m., March 1st. 9 aircraft, each carrying roughly 80 Mark 82 500-pound bombs in internal bays plus wing stores, released across a target box that overlapped precisely with the sensor activation grid. 216 tons of high explosive struck an area approximately 2 miles long and half a mile wide, where between 1,500 and 2,000 NVA soldiers sat in shallow trenches waiting for the order to advance. The Marines on 881 South heard nothing from 30,000 feet above. Then the ground convulsed. Dabney's men reported a sustained roar lasting over 40 seconds. Not discrete explosions, but a single continuous sound, like fabric tearing at impossible volume. The pressure waves flattened vegetation that had survived previous strikes. Dust climbed thousands of feet into the night sky and drifted south across the combat base for hours. Dawn patrols found the trench network erased. The Marine Intelligence Summary from March first notes that aerial photography revealed what it describes as total destruction of field fortifications across the target area. Bodies and equipment fragments scattered across churned earth. The report estimates between 300 and 400 NVA killed in that single strike sequence. The 325th C Division's assault never launched. Its 2 staging regiments ceased to exist as coherent fighting formations sometime around 1:15 a.m. 11 hours separated the first sensor ping from obliteration. The NVA divisional staff planning the assault had spent weeks positioning troops, stockpiling ammunition, coordinating with adjacent units. Giap's Dien Bien Phu playbook required massing forces for overwhelming local superiority at the point of attack. Arc light made massing fatal. The very concentration of force that doctrine demanded became the mechanism of annihilation. Each tactical adjustment Giap's commanders tried only deepened their exposure to the same killing system. Major General John Tolson lifted his command helicopter off the pad at Kalu on April 1, 1968, and turned west toward Khe Sanh. Below him, 3 brigades of the 1st Air Cavalry Division advanced along Route 9 in a combined air-ground assault that had taken 6 days to cover 12 kilometers of jungle, ridge, and river valley. Operation Pegasus carried 30,000 troops, 400 helicopters, and enough firepower to crack open anything the NVA placed in its path. The NVA placed almost nothing. That surprised everyone. Tolson's brigades expected a fighting advance. Intelligence estimated 2 full NVA divisions still occupied positions around the combat base. Perhaps 20,000 soldiers dug into fortified lines with anti-aircraft weapons, heavy mortars, recoilless rifles. The air cavalry prepared for a major engagement. Commanders briefed casualty projections, running into the hundreds. Artillery batteries displaced forward every few kilometers to maintain continuous fire support. Cobra gunships flew screening missions ahead of each battalion column. The machine ground forward, ready for a battle that kept failing to materialize. Scattered contacts along the route produced brief firefights, a platoon-sized ambush here, a few sniper positions there, but nothing resembling the divisional defense that 2 NVA divisions should have mounted across 12 kilometers of favorable terrain. By April 6th, lead elements of the 3rd Brigade linked up with the 26th Marines at the combat base perimeter. The road stood open. The siege, 77 days old, ended with a handshake between a cavalry colonel and a Marine captain standing in red dust. What Tolson's troops found in the surrounding jungle told the story that the anticlimactic link-up obscured. Patrol companies fanning out from Route 9 into the hills north and south of the corridor walked into a landscape that no longer functioned as terrain. The B-52 strikes had reorganized the earth itself. Craters 30 feet across and 15 feet deep overlapped in chains that stretched for hundreds of meters, turning ridgelines into saw-toothed rubble fields where no vegetation survived. Shattered tree trunks, stripped of bark and branches, reduced to pale splintered poles, jutted from cratered soil at angles that made them look driven in by force. The smell hit patrols before the visuals did. 77 days of decomposition in tropical heat, partially buried under collapsed earthworks, produced a stench that one platoon sergeant from the 2nd Battalion, 7th Cavalry described as something that got into your clothes and stayed for weeks after you left. He said he burned his uniform at the end of his tour because washing did nothing. Recovery teams counted NVA dead methodically through April and into May. The numbers climbed. Official Marine Corps estimates settled on between 10,000 and 15,000 NVA killed during the siege, a range wide enough to be irritating, and the classified after-action review from MACV headquarters acknowledges that crater burial made precise counts impossible. The file lists the lower bound as conservative. Captured NVA documents recovered from abandoned bunker complexes northwest of the combat base referenced specific units that had ceased reporting entirely. The 325th C Division, the same formation whose regiments vanished under arc light on March 1st, appeared in captured correspondence as combat ineffective by mid-March. The 304th Division, GIAP's Dien Bien Phu veterans, reported losing 60% of its infantry strength before Pegasus launched. 77 days, 2 NVA divisions wrecked beyond recovery. Regimental command structures dissolved. Battalion strength assault forces erased between sensor ping and bomb impact, while their commanders had no mechanism to even identify the threat, let alone counter it. The Marines lost 274 killed during the siege, 274 men against perhaps 10,000. Giap built his campaign around the assumption that Khe Sanh would replay Dien Bien Phu, that massed infantry, artillery superiority, and willingness to absorb casualties would overwhelm a fixed garrison cut off from resupply. Every element of his plan depended on conditions that had existed in 1954 and no longer existed in 1968. The French at Dien Bien Phu had 56 aircraft supporting them. Westmoreland had 2,000. Piroth's guns numbered fewer than 60. Niagara delivered ordnance from B-52s that flew beyond weather, beyond anti-aircraft fire, beyond sight itself. Giap fed divisions into a system designed to consume them, and the system performed exactly as designed. Westmoreland stood over that same map of Dien Bien Phu in his Saigon office on April 7, 1968, the day after Pegasus had linked up. He unpinned it from the wall. The comparison had served its purpose, not as a warning of what might happen, but as a blueprint for ensuring it never could. Giap wanted the parallel. He structured his entire campaign around it, the same encirclement tactics and artillery preparation, the same massed infantry assaults against a fixed garrison in a valley surrounded by hills. He committed 2 of his best divisions, formations whose institutional memory stretched back to the victory that broke France's will to fight. He executed the playbook faithfully. The playbook killed his army. The MACV after-action review tallies 24,000 tactical air sorties and 2,700 B-52 strikes flown in support of Khe Sanh during the 77-day siege. The declassified logistics summary records over 100,000 tons of ordnance delivered, a figure so large it becomes abstract until you divide it by the estimated NVA troop strength in the operational area. That math produces roughly 2.5 tons per soldier. Sources conflict on the exact NVA strength at peak, and the personnel files from Hanoi's side remain closed. The numbers we have come from captured documents, prisoner interrogations, body counts conducted in cratered moonscape, where entire companies lay buried under collapsed earthworks. The NVA soldiers who crawled toward Dabney's wire on Hill 881 South fought with discipline that career Marines respected. The sappers who probed the combat base perimeter every night for 11 weeks did so knowing the odds. The 304th Division's infantry advanced through napalm, kept formation, reached the concertina, and died there. Professionals executing a mission that the technology arrayed against them had already made impossible. They did not fail for lack of courage or competence. They failed because Giap asked them to defeat an enemy that could erase a regiment between sunset and sunrise from an altitude where no anti-aircraft gun could reach and no human ear could detect the approaching aircraft. Corporal James Archer survived his tour. He kept counting rounds until the siege ended. The plateau at Khe Sanh sits in Quang Tri Province today, accessible by a paved road that follows the old Route 9 corridor. The combat base is a coffee plantation now. Arabica plants grow in neat rows across ground that absorbed over 100,000 tons of American ordnance. The craters have softened into shallow depressions between the rows, filled with red soil and root systems. Vietnamese farmers work them every harvest season,